Hey guys, Christopher McSweeney here, and let's jump into lesson one, which is synchronous versus asynchronous, or if you go alphabetical order, asynchronous versus synchronous instruction. So before we dive into that, let's take a bigger look at curriculum and kind of jump out and see, what we're dealing with as teachers. Okay, so my whole concept of teaching changed about 6 years ago-ish when I learned that the root of the word curriculum is Latin, and it refers to a race, like a running race or whatever. And that was like a major shift for me in the way that I was thinking about my practice of teaching, because I was a swimmer in college, and in my later years of my swimming career, I was a distance swimmer. And so my coach would help me work out, how do I swim a 200-yard race or a 500-yard race? Whereas before I used to be a 50-yard swimmer, which is a sprint there and back, just get the race done as fast as you can. And so there's all this strategy involved. When should I speed up? When should I slow down? Who am I racing? What's their racing style? And so if you've coached anything, you kind of have an idea, especially if it involves a race, you know what that's like. And so we want to take our curriculum, our content area, and envision it as a race with a start and a finish for our students. And they're going to go through this race course, and we're going to coach them through. And so hopefully that illustration will help you with the asynchronous versus synchronous when we're talking about curriculum as a race. And so the major areas that we're dealing with in our profession is teaching and learning. And teaching is what we do as the teachers, obviously. And then learning is what our students do. And those are two very distinct experiences. And so asynchronous and synchronous learning affect those two areas. And so we need to make sure that when we're looking at these, we're being very specific as to what we're talking about and what the role of each person is in this race. Okay, so we have this word chronos, which refers to time, right? So asynchronous and synchronous are going to be time related. So it's not necessarily your content that's going to change. It's going to be the timing of that content, right? And so let's kind of break these down, and we'll take a look at synchronous first because we're a little bit more familiar with that. So that is basically what we've always done in a traditional brick and mortar school, synchronous instruction. So typically a synchronous instruction is a more teacher-centric model because it's has more pros for the teacher than it does the learner. So when we're thinking about this, keep that in mind. While we do our best to make it a student-centric environment, synchronous instruction and learning does favor the teacher in this aspect. So if you want to think of it, what are some pros? Well, it's easy to plan, right? You have a planning period, and you teach this. What do I teach tomorrow? We're all at the same place. And so planning for a synchronous course is really, really easy for the most part. It can be less stress for most students, right? Not for all, but for most, because everyone's going at the same pace. They all have that relatable moment of, okay, this is a tough thing to learn, but we're all in it together, or hey, this one's relatively easy, cool. But remember, we do have outliers in terms of learning, right? So some students are going to struggle and some students are going to breeze through things. But for the majority of students, it's less stressful because they're all in it together. For teachers, it's less stress because there's no juggling of assignments. It's you're doing this tonight, we're going to do this tomorrow, the next day we're going to do this. And so it's really easy for the teacher. And so you can kind of think of it as, everyone's on the same or at least similar page. And when we're referring to the curriculum race, we're all running this together, right? We're all paced out together. So if you have that super athlete in the race who's like, no, I want to go faster, you got to say, no, stay with the pack. And then that other runner who's new at it, like if it's a running race and they're huffing and puffing, barely making the time interval, but we're going to drag them through that, and we're all going to go through this race together. So as far as the cons go, there's not a lot of wiggle room in time. So if a student misses a day or many days, that can be really difficult for a student to get back on track with everybody, especially over multiple courses. And so that causes some issues because, again, we're moving forward as a group. And so then that person has to make up that room. So it's really difficult for that scenario. I've kind of mentioned it, but students who need more time don't necessarily get that. And then the students who want to go ahead, they're held back because they don't have the ability to move fluidly throughout the curriculum. Another con to this would be extended distance learning. I think we all kind of got fatigued at the end of April and going into May as to how do we continue teaching and engaging students in a distance learning scenario. I don't have a ton of research or anything on that. I just know from my personal experience, trying to keep it synchronous over a long term was really difficult. So let's go into the asynchronous model, which is less of a teacher-centric model. It puts more of a focus on what the student experience is, what the student learning is like. So basically, going back to the race, it's if you were training and you said, okay guys, let's go out and run a 5K, go for your best time. And so you're gonna have those students who are a little bit faster, they're gonna go faster, slower students are gonna go slower, but everyone's gonna complete the same race, just at their own pace. And so we're there kind of as like the coach, as the facilitator of this curriculum, encouraging where we need to encourage, helping people go back whenever we need to. You've probably experienced this in like a university setting. If you've taken any online classes, the course is just there. This is an asynchronous learning experience as well. So you're just clicking through the website, learning however you want, at whatever time you want. There was a really interesting article, I wonder if I could find it, called The Prisoner of Time, and it talks about like the bell schedule and things like that, and where your student is not confined to just a set period where they're going to learn this subject. They have all day to pick the best time for them to learn. So the pros, obviously the students have the latitude to kind of go at their own pace, which is great, especially in a situation where there is a teacher who can kind of keep them accountable rather than just like, okay, here's the stuff, race, set, go, you're free to learn. We have to keep encouraging students. But they're able to go more slowly in a difficult area or more quickly on easier topics. Missed days are no longer a factor, which is awesome. So if a kid gets sick, they can still peruse the content, or they can just wait, and there's not a big issue because the content is still there, ready and waiting for them. So that's not like, if they miss 5 days, well, they can just make that up whenever they need to, because everything's available to them. The cons of this is it's really more difficult for teachers to manage and create this, right? Because you have to put all the content out there all at once, so your students can go through it as they please, right? If you say, okay, hey, in asynchronous, there's 50 lessons, I have 3 of them up. That's not asynchronous. So really, really difficult. Also, as students advance or review material, they start spreading out, and it's really difficult to manage all those places, right? You'll have different assignments coming in, all types of times, and it's really difficult to just manage as a teacher. But you can get through it. It's just a lot more difficult, right? So better for the student, much more difficult for a teacher. So here's some, little reflection questions for you, as well as the other reflection of I like, I wish, I wonder, I think. I want you to go through that as well. But what was your first thought when it comes to asynchronous learning? For you, what are some of the pros and cons? And then question 2, what was your idea of synchronous learning? What are pros and cons to that in your experience? So I hope this video helps. Take some time to reflect, and good luck.